I want to remember, first of all, the years 68, 69, 70 with you. Resisting the war in Vietnam, fighting racism, sexism, inequality, injustice, poverty, the disparity between the rich and the poor, the trashing of the environment, fighting ROTC right on this campus. Jim Thomas, are you here? He's the guy who went in with me to ROTC. We took a class, they couldn't kick us out. Ending restrictive hours for women students on this campus. In 68, these streets, these buildings, with a background for many hundreds, sometimes thousands of students, townspeople, and even some faculty members who stood with and who marched with millions of others in hundreds of universities, dozens of cities in America, in France, in Czechoslovakia, in Mexico, and hundreds of other places where people gathered to challenge the injustice and the violence that seeped from every pore, crack, and crevice on the surface of our world, our poor, wounded world. We gathered to defy our rich owners and our power-mad leaders. We were in the main nonviolent, although more than history books relate, we were violated, wounded, sometimes killed, a few of us by the forces of law and order at home, while those same forces killed 2 million Vietnamese people approximately and 60,000 American soldiers during our war on Vietnam. In 68, in particular, for a moment, the great mass of humanity seemed to be flowing towards some cataclysmic earthquake, some rupture with the old oppressive system. Some of us felt optimistically that we were part of the end of worldwide capitalism, a system based in greedy hoarding, painted with what we learned, what I learned anyway, because it was new to me, a facade here in the US, a veneer of tissue-thin democracy, even thinner today, I guess. In addition, at the same time, there was the spreading of something some of us believe was the alternative, the logical, humane, democratic, and sensible alternative, socialism, that came on the wings of hope, but sank before our sometimes too long unseeing eyes into forms of injustice that mocked its own heritage. In the Soviet Union and then in China, we saw a corruption of the ideals of the next possible kind of world. So in 68, these two rigid systems, socialism, sensible in theory, but corrupt in practice, and capitalism, corrupt in theory and practice. In 68, these were confronted by a worldwide contentious conglomerate of liberational spirit. And I'm speaking sentimentally, it was grand. It was grand. And I know the spin. Those silly students, those few feckless faculty members, those mindless, hapless hippies, those pinko un-American lefties, those pacifists, those no-nuke nuts, all blind to our own ridiculousness, all in sum a failure. Take History 101, I'm sure they'll tell you that. Do not believe it. Amidst the general improbability of our larger hopes came victories. Along with the successes of the Vietnamese military and civilian resistance, along with the unwillingness of the guys in our own army to keep fighting, we in our marches and our demonstrations did play a part in the ending of the war in Vietnam, because we became a cost too difficult for the system to bear. We controlled the streets. We did. And the state have secure state power. It must control the streets, but we did. Increasingly, we controlled the streets, the campuses, and most importantly, we were changing the minds of more and more people. That was a victory, friends. That was a victory. Now I'll tell you a name. I don't know if she's here tonight. I wish she was. Denise Ryan was a student right here in 68 who announced that she would stay out after the hour of 11 on weeknights and 1 on weekends when women, all women students, were to be locked in.
For their own good.
For their own good. She did that, and she was brought to a student trial. There were demonstrations here for her, and for the end, to a locus parentis, and Denise and the students won, and you, if you're here, students, you don't have ours. The freedom students have in their own personal lives came directly out of the struggles like those of Denise Ryan and hundreds of others. That was a victory. You know, at least 20 million people, probably more, claim they were at Woodstock. Why? I asked myself, why do so many wish they had been there? Woodstock is in our collective memory, and I think it's a moment when we experienced, or in my case, imagined the pure joy of being. And who wouldn't want to have been there? A victory.
Yes.
Our culture was forever changed. Even those remote from the foci of struggle, merely watching on TV, were changed. So many lives were forever made more meaningful. No longer what we had been destined to be, cogs in a murderous, soulless, merciless, and boring machine. We found good work. Some of us here now in reunion understand how we continue the spirit and practice of activism on into the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, these decades, as Bill said, don't make much difference, just time moving on. And how still now, work in schools, community organizing, unions, social service agencies, and radical organizing on campuses. We are everywhere, still making a difference, and yes, still enraged by the depth and breadth of this repressive system, but as in 1968, still alive with hope. And our children know. Our children and grandchildren know. Forgot to mention my grandchild, James, here.
Yeah.
Our children know.
Yeah.
A victory. The flow of action and reaction is lumpy, sometimes quiescence, then a surge of positive acceleration. And so after those years, the worldwide tidal wave began to recede. That grand and portentous moment slipped away. No one nor any group can claim credit for its flowering. No one or any group is particularly at fault for the sharp decline in mass militant activism. Maybe it wasn't time yet. Maybe we collectively weren't ready yet. Certainly, in my view, by Kent State, the militant spirit was evaporating from mass movements. The great flood of liberal and radical resistance pretty much disappeared. Below the surface of social life, now only coming sporadically and episodically to the surface. But organizing still went on. The numbers reduced perhaps, but the message is clear as ever. The Greens, the anti-nuke movement, the environmental movement, the co-ops, the daycare centers, the World Trade Organization, demonstrations, and now the re-emerging of SDS on campuses. That's a good thing. To the new and to those of us who came before, and in my case, before, who still work for peace and justice, I say, be patient, be strong, it will come. It will surely come again. Mass participation, militant activism, sustained, reaching to each community oppressed by the worldwide so-called free market economy. And in case we need to remind ourselves, no pundit in 1959 sensed what was coming in the 60s. Not one.
Right.
The 60s were a surprise, and be sure that the babbling heads and the political pundits will be surprised when activism again accelerates here at the center and at the imperial outposts. Some complex calculus is at work. Needs are growing. Religious fundamentalism promises paradise in the hereafter, but how long can that illusion confound the reality of misery? How long will people be ready to believe in the illusions? How long will they hold still when here at the center of empire, the top 1% earn more than the bottom 50%? That means the top 300,000 people earn more than the bottom 150 million people. Something's wrong. Last year, 400 Americans increased their income by $290 billion. Each! $290 billion each. For a total of $1.54 trillion. That was their raise last year. We have the highest rate of child poverty of any major country. Something's wrong. Since Bush took office, 8.6 million people have lost their health care, 3 million people have lost manufacturing jobs, and another 3 million lost their pensions. And all the while, the Iraq war costs $2 billion per week.